The terror didn't arrive with a bang. It crept in through the back door of German academia. For decades, Germany had been the undisputed capital of physics, the birthplace of quantum mechanics and relativity. But the laws of physics were about to be supplanted by the laws of race. In 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed chancellor. The ensuing Law for the Restoration of the Professional Civil Service was not aimed at soldiers or politicians. Its first victims were professors, doctors, and scientists deemed non-Aryan. The purge was immediate and brutal. Leo Szilard, a mercurial, visionary Hungarian physicist working in Berlin, was among the first to recognize the gravity of the shift. Szilard was an intellectual nomad, a man whose mind perpetually ran 2 steps ahead of reality. The moment he saw the new laws, he booked a one-way ticket to London. He didn't just fear for his life, he feared what the Nazis might do with the science he knew was possible. In England, Szilard walked the streets, haunted by an idea. It was here, crossing a London street in 1933, that the concept of the nuclear chain reaction crystallized in Szilard's mind. He realized that if a neutron could split an atomic nucleus, releasing more neutrons, a self-sustaining and potentially devastatingly powerful explosion was achievable. Szilard, acutely aware that this was not mere science, but a potential world-ender, immediately tried to suppress his findings, even securing a secret patent to keep the key knowledge out of the wrong hands. The irony was profound. A refugee scientist's first act of war was trying to lock away the bomb he hadn't yet created. Meanwhile, other titans of science were scattering. The Hungarian mathematician Eugene Wigner, a quiet, meticulous man with a conscience as sharp as his intellect, left for Princeton University. The brilliant Italian Enrico Fermi, whose work on induced radioactivity had already earned him a Nobel Prize, was also marked. Fermi's wife, Laura, was Jewish, and by 1938, Mussolini's Italy had adopted its own vicious anti-Semitic laws. The day Fermi accepted his Nobel Prize in Stockholm, he and Laura made a silent pact. They would not return to Italy. Their official trip to Sweden became their permanent exile to America. These were not isolated events. They were a systemic transfer of genius. Every time Hitler signed an anti-Jewish decree, he was signing away a piece of his scientific advantage, handing it directly to the Allies. The flow of intellect from Europe to the United States was the greatest, most unearned intellectual windfall in American history. The culmination of the European phase of the story rests with Lise Meitner. She was the soul of German physics, having worked side by side with Otto Hahn for 30 years. They were a legendary non-romantic partnership that had driven the field forward. In the summer of 1938, as the Gestapo's grip tightened, Meitner, then 60, finally had to flee Berlin. She left in a panic, aided by Hahn and Dutch colleagues, crossing the border into Holland with a single 10-mark note and a diamond ring her friend Hahn had given her for emergencies. It was in exile in Sweden, on a cold Christmas holiday in 1938, that Meitner received a letter from Hahn. It described his baffling experiment. When he bombarded uranium with neutrons, he found the element barium, an atom roughly half the size of uranium. Hahn was utterly mystified. Meitner sat in the snow with her nephew, the physicist Otto Frisch. As they walked, they sketched diagrams on scraps of paper, trying to make sense of the results. Suddenly, the answer hit her. The uranium nucleus had been split. The word she coined for the process, fission, was a biological term, describing cell division. But the physics held an even terrifying implication. Using Albert Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared, Meitner calculated the energy released by the mass difference between the original uranium nucleus and the resulting lighter elements. The number was colossal, an unprecedented 200 million electron volts per atom. She was the first to grasp the staggering energy potential locked within the atom. Her discovery, published in January 1939, electrified the scientific world. It proved Szilard's earlier fears were correct. Fission was real. The bomb was possible. And it was born from the collaboration of a Jewish exile and the data of the man she had to leave behind in Germany.
The news of fission spread like wildfire among the American-based European exiles. They saw their worst fears confirmed. The Nazis, with Hahn and other brilliant scientists still in Germany, were now in possession of the key to the ultimate weapon. Szilard, now in New York, was galvanized. He knew that the only way to stop Hitler from getting the bomb was to beat him to it. But to do that, they needed two things: massive government funding and access to the world's only known supply of uranium ore, which was primarily in the Belgian Congo. Szilard's problem was that he was a refugee, a Hungarian intellectual with a heavy accent, struggling to explain a theoretical concept about splitting atoms to American officials who were focused on the war in Europe. He needed a voice of unquestionable authority. He immediately sought out the most authoritative voice in the world, Albert Einstein. Einstein, the most famous scientist alive, was residing quietly on Long Island. On July 16, 1939, Szilard, along with Eugene Wigner, drove out to meet Einstein. Szilard had to explain the concept of a nuclear chain reaction and its military implications, something Einstein, whose focus was on pure theory, had not fully considered. Einstein, a lifelong pacifist, listened with grave intensity. When Szilard finished, Einstein immediately grasped the monstrous potential. He famously remarked, "I never thought of that." The result was a 2-page document, meticulously drafted by Szilard and signed by Einstein on August 2, 1939. This Einstein-Szilard letter was a masterstroke of political persuasion and scientific warning. It alerted President Franklin D. Roosevelt to the recent scientific work suggesting that it may become possible to set up a nuclear chain reaction in a large mass of uranium. The fact that this could lead to extremely powerful bombs of a new type. The urgent warning that Germany had already stopped the sale of uranium from mines in Czechoslovakia, a clear signal of their intentions. The letter was slow to reach the president, passed along by financiers and presidential friends. But when it finally landed on FDR's desk in October 1939, it carried the weight of the man who had redefined the universe. The president took the warning seriously. His immediate response was succinct. This calls for action. This single letter, authored by a frightened Hungarian refugee and endorsed by the world's most famous Jewish exile, was the spark. It formally launched the American effort, known initially as the Advisory Committee on Uranium, and began the most expensive and secretive scientific undertaking in human history, all because Hitler had driven his greatest thinkers into the arms of his enemy. The Advisory Committee moved slowly at first. America was not yet at war, and the scale of the commitment required was astronomical. The refugees, however, knew the clock was ticking, not in months, but in days. The crucial next step fell to Enrico Fermi at Columbia University, and later at the University of Chicago. If the chain reaction was the theory, the nuclear reactor, or pile, was the proof. A successful reactor would demonstrate that a sustained, controllable release of nuclear energy was possible, paving the way for the bomb. The site for this audacious experiment was beneath the west stands of the abandoned Stagg Field football stadium at the University of Chicago. It was a bizarre, improbable choice. A top-secret scientific mission housed in a cavernous, dark squash court directly beneath a major city. Fermi, a man nicknamed the Pope for his infallible scientific intuition, led the effort. He presided over a team made up almost entirely of fellow exiles and émigrés. They worked with graphite bricks, shaping them into a huge, crude lattice, interspersed with chunks of uranium oxide. It was a monumentally difficult, dirty, and dangerous job, with the toxic dust coating the workers like soot. The American scientists had never seen anything like the European refugees' desperate intensity. Finally, on December 2, 1942, the Chicago team was ready. Fermi, armed with a slide rule, supervised the removal of the cadmium control rods that absorbed the neutrons. Slowly, painstakingly, the control rods were withdrawn. The goal was to reach criticality, the point where the chain reaction was self-sustaining. The atmosphere in the squash court was silent, thick with anticipation and the quiet anxiety of the scientists. When the final rod was withdrawn a calculated distance, Fermi's face broke into a calm, small smile. "The pile has gone critical," he announced in his heavy Italian accent. The world's first man-made, self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction had been achieved. It had taken a little over 3 years from the publication of Meitner's theory to Fermi's proof. The success was confirmed by Eugene Wigner, who was present, but in a display of quintessential European formality and deep emotion, he didn't offer a traditional American cheer. Instead, Wigner produced a bottle of Chianti he had concealed and offered it to Fermi. The team drank the wine from paper cups, a small shared sacrament to their incredible, terrifying achievement. The symbolic weight of the moment was not lost on them. It was a triumph of exile. The bomb was no longer a theoretical possibility to be feared, it was a technical reality to be built. The Advisory Committee on Uranium was immediately replaced by a far more powerful, military-driven operation, the Manhattan Project. The Foreign Legion had delivered the spark, and now the military would unleash the fire. The narrative would continue with Part 2, The Race Against Time, detailing the clash between military security and scientific freedom, the creation of the secret city of Los Alamos, and the intense, hidden life of the refugee scientists working to save a world that was not fully their own. Would you like to continue into the next phase of the story, focusing on the establishment of Los Alamos and the personalities driving the scientific work? The success of the Chicago pile in December 1942 did more than confirm a scientific theory. It proved that the creation of an atomic weapon was a matter of engineering, logistics, and industrial might, not just physics. The government's involvement immediately escalated from a small research committee to a vast, multi-billion-dollar military operation, the Manhattan Engineer District, or the Manhattan Project. To run an operation of such unprecedented scale and secrecy, President Roosevelt needed a man of ruthless efficiency, iron will, and profound disregard for bureaucratic niceties. And he found him in Brigadier General Leslie Groves. Groves was an abrasive, corpulent, and overwhelmingly competent military engineer who had just finished overseeing the construction of the Pentagon, then the largest office building in the world. He was the perfect antithesis to the scattered, intellectual temperament of the European scientists. Groves saw the scientists as brilliant, temperamental children who needed to be managed, contained, and above all, kept quiet. He saw the project through the lens of concrete, budgets, and deadlines. He had one mandate: produce a weapon before Hitler did. Groves immediately established 3 massive industrial complexes across the United States, operating under layers of secrecy and misdirection. Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Site X, dedicated to enriching uranium-235, a task requiring unfathomable amounts of electrical power and vast, intricate machinery. It became a city of 75,000 people, built from scratch in less than 2 years, none of whom truly knew what they were producing. Hanford, Washington, Site W, built to produce the synthetic element plutonium. This involved building massive nuclear reactors, descendants of Fermi's pile, on the Columbia